The man scratched the back of his head and said that he could still continue. At that moment, Hancheol grabbed the guy's leg with his hand and asked, did he really think he could knock him out just because he couldn't use his legs? He pulled the man's leg and he fell, and the man put his weight on him and held his fist near his face. He added that it is very common to see kids from good families suddenly start thinking they are fighters for justice and think they can change the world around them. That's what he looks like now. And he likes to watch people like him shit their pants in fear. As he was about to strike, Haru screamed no, but the teacher said with a sly smirk that that wasn't all. Hanul kicked the man in the knee. The man winced in pain, but he still managed to hit the guy in the shoulder. Haru asked if he missed. Smiling even more fearfully, the teacher said it was time to exploit the big guy's second weakness. Hanchul shouted loudly, which surprised Hanchul. Immediately afterward, the guy slapped his palm on his cheek, closer to his ear. The teacher laughed and said that no matter how strong you are, there are always body parts that can't be trained. The man grimaced at the pain in his ear. He thought about how he was dizzy. He needed to come to his senses quickly. He bit his lip until it bled, and after that he was fine. But the guy was able to free his legs and, lying on his back, point them at the man's head. Smiling bloodthirstily, he told him to die. As he flew back and fell on his back, the man thought about how such a green kid was able to finish him off like that. He can't even move. When big guys like him can't even beat these kids in brute strength, he's not even a bandit, let alone anything more. Hanul walked over to the man, breathing heavily and holding his shoulder. He was shaking, but he, with a smile on his face, asked who said that. But he didn't have time to finish because he himself passed out and fell down beside him. But, he thought, who said he grew up in an ordinary family? The referee didn't know what to say for a long time, raised his hand and hesitantly announced that the sparring was over. Through this sparring, Hanul drew unnecessary attention to himself. The man sat in his office wearing a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves that showed off his tattoos. His hair was black and styled back, and he had a beard and thin mustache on his face. He was watching a live feed from a qualifying match through his laptop. On the screen was a scene of Hanyu and his opponent lying on the mats. The man turned to the man in front of him and said that he had asked him to believe in this guy, but now Uhan Cheol's legs were damaged, which meant that he now had no chance of advancing to the next stage, and their Kanghan faction had become a laughingstock. The man in front of him was kneeling down with his head lowered. It was the big man of their billiard room. He was apologizing, asked him to forgive him. The man stood up from the table and asked him if he even realized how much money had been bet on this. The man in front of him asked him to give him another chance. The man walked over to the bag of golf clubs, took one and said, asking that high school student that represents the Hua Ryung faction, this victory earned him the title of level 3 champion, right? He can't even hear those Hua Ryung assholes laughing at them right now. He put the edge of the club next to the man who was startled and started to beg not to. He looked down at him and said, get busy with this guy. The big man didn't understand what the man meant. This made the man angry, swung his club and shouted to take care of this high school student who had defeated Uhan Cheol. The man's cringe sounded. Hanul and Haru were on a public bus. All the seats were taken, so they stood holding onto the handrail. The boy apologized for that. He could have gone alone, but the teacher insisted on it. The girl replied that as if she could leave him alone and let him fumble around even more. The boy apologized again, but his shoulder was pierced with pain, and he clutched at it and mourned. The girl said his shoulder would hurt a lot for a while. After all, he had taken a direct hit there. He should try not to strain it too much until the next match. When the bus stopped at another stop, a lot of people came inside. The guy was standing on the aisle side, but the girl wasn't. So when someone pushed him, he grabbed the post behind the girl's back with his sore hand. Their faces turned out to be close together, but he crouched again in pain and could barely restrain himself from screaming. It felt like his shoulder was about to just rip off. He couldn't take it anymore. The girl facing him saw his agony and frightenedly asked why he was leaning on his shoulder. She pulled the guy's arm away from the handrail, but that caused the guy to collapse on top of her. From the side, it looked like they were hugging. The guy's face turned red. He apologized, saying it was just that there were so many people here. He would move back a little now. He grabbed for the handle again, but the girl pulled his hand away from there. Laying her head on his shoulder, he calmly told him to just stand as he stands. He doesn't want to hurt his shoulder. He wanted to say something back, but remained silent. A brightly colored building lit by multiple spotlights had a glass ball on the roof. On it was written Ganghan Night. A man with a beard and a thin mustache punched the phone buttons. In front of him was the big guy from the pool hall again, who had a bandaged head and a broken arm. The man looked at him angrily and asked him if it wasn't enough that he was embarrassed enough with the GT League, but he had brought this traitor here. Where was he looking when he made him third? The man looked down at the floor and begged for forgiveness. He would find a new representative for the bottom, and then the money he'd lost. But the man interrupted him, yelling that he was a fucking fucker. He told him to use the same guy he'd used last time. He swung around to punch him with his fist, but then a man in a red shirt with a yellow pattern walked into the office. He called out to the boss and told him that maybe he shouldn't get so worked up. After all, he's an older man. Let him relax already. The man straightened up and replied that he seemed to have a lot of attitude after betraying him and joining Hua Ryung's faction. The guest replied with a smirk, asking, "So what? Or does he want to go against Hua Ryung? He shouldn't be doing that. Unless, of course, he's looking for death." The man in bandages shouted at him, calling him an ungrateful bastard. Is he completely out of his mind? To which the man replied not to make them so angry. He was just in the neighborhood, they're opening a new office nearby, so he thought he'd drop by and say hello. The man with the beard said that he must have a real problem with his head if he thought he could just walk around his territory like that. Kang Han's territory. The guest put his hands to his sides and asked the boss with a smile, "Is there anyone who doesn't know about the mighty Kang Han faction?" He had to say that the GT League qualifier was awesome. Never before had there been a case of a faction's chairman not being able to pass the qualifier. It was interesting. The man was ready to pounce on him, but the man was already at the door and said goodbye, saying he'd stop by again sometime to say hello. And by the way, maybe it's time for him to start thinking about retirement. He seemed to be losing his touch. When the door closed behind him, the boss got angry, shouted, and slammed his fist against the desk, breaking it in half. The bandaged man stared at his hand, whose knuckles were reddening. The boss asked, "What happened to that high school kid, Gang Hanel, or whatever his name was?" The man excitedly began to tell him that he hadn't been going to school lately, so they'd been watching his house, but so too no one. The boss turned to him with a strained smile and said that he seemed to have really gone insane, since he's still keeping him third when he can't even find one high schooler. Maybe he shouldn't keep him at that position. What does he think? The man started asking to be given some time. He's already done some digging. He found out that some girl named Lee Haru hangs around him all the time. He'll bring him here tomorrow. As he approached his uncle's house, Haru said that she had a strange feeling all day today. It was probably just imagined, but there was someone following her around the corner. She walked into the room where Hanel was sitting on the couch and said that he was now second to Chun Ho Dong in preliminary matches. The boy asked if that was true. The girl stated that it would be different now after all. He was now among the 32 competitors from their region. The guy put his hand on his bandaged shoulder and asked what about him. Would he be able to continue fighting in the league? Haru said that if her uncle was to be believed, a couple points of good rest and he'd be fine. But she had to go now. Let him call if he needed anything. The boy said thanks, and the girl, opening the door, turned to him and told him again not to bother straining his shoulder. But behind the door stood the man from the billiard room. He grabbed the girl from behind and covered her mouth with his hand. He said, laughing happily, that there he had found him. The guy was startled, shouted the girl's name and held out his healthy hand toward her. He said, laughing happily, that there he had found him. The guy was startled, shouted the girl's name and held out his healthy hand to her. Following the man, several more thugs came in. A man with a cast on his arm holding the girl told the guy that he had finally found him. Hanel tossed his glasses to one of the bandits. The one caught them and asked, "What are these?" But no sooner had he raised his head, the guy crashed into him with his hands, pushing him back into the wall. Everyone was startled, and the guy with long hair pulled into a low ponytail asked, "What was that?" Hanel stopped in front of him and shouted that whoever touches that girl is a dead man. He slammed his head into the guy's jaw, so much so that several teeth fell out and he flew out the open door. The third bandit, who was bald, held a pancake stick in his hand. Hanel was in a stance as he leaned on the floor with one hand. The man hit him on his injured shoulder with the stick. The boy screamed in pain and fell to the floor. The man yelled, asking who he thought he was, and kicked him in the stomach. The guy flew off and hit the back of the couch. The man's hand that was holding the girl loosened a little, and she was able to scream his name fearfully. The guy was lying on the floor unconscious. The man in charge told the rest of the thugs to take both of them. It was sunset outside. The sky was colored orange. A man with a beard and mustache sat at his desk with his arms crossed in a lock. He pressed the button of his desk phone and a voice came out to say that they had caught Gang Hanel. What should they do with him? The man calmly replied that he had disabled their best fighter. Maybe they should pay him in the same coin.